When farmers are working with their equipment and the tractors, there's lots of hazards, and we've talked some about the PTO, the power takeoff is very dangerous. There's also your hydraulic hoses and your hydraulic fluid. That may not appear to be extremely dangerous, especially when you're just hooking hoses up to the back of the tractor, but it actually is very dangerous. Hydraulic fluid, to give you an example, when you open the valve on your sink in the bathroom or in the kitchen, that's hydraulics. The water coming out is hydraulic fluid, it's under pressure, and that's why it comes out. The difference with something like this is the hydraulic pressure is enormously higher, the fluid is extremely hot, and there's lots of hazards associated with that. Now, when you're looking at when I talk about pressure and the hydraulics, the fluid is coming out of the back of the tractor at 2,500 psi. Okay, that's pounds per square inch. And what does that mean? Well, basically, if you look at, say, the tire pressure on your car, that's usually around 30 psi. So we're talking about going from 30 psi to 2,500. Extremely high pressure. Also, as the fluid starts operating in the equipment, it gets very hot. The fluid can get up to around 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, as an example, 212 degrees is boiling, so 140 degrees is scalding hot, and so any exposure to that can be extremely dangerous. Now, how can these things become dangerous? I showed when we're hooking up to the back of the tractor, we just take the hose and we plug it in, and it looks real safe. When it operates correctly, it is real safe. However, one of the things that happens, and when we look at the hydraulic hoses, and we'll take an example of these are in very good shape. This is actually a fairly new implement. It's about a year old. After years of wear and exposure to the environment, these hoses begin to crack, and also after continual use, they begin to leak. And leaking of hoses can cause a lot of mechanical problems, but it's also a very bad safety hazard. So you imagine lots of times when these things begin to leak, the first leak is actually just a small pinhole that's can be the size of a hypodermic needle coming out of the hose that you can't even see the fluid. It's so small. What happens is the farmers can be checking their hoses with their hands or just plugging them in. They come in contact with that leak, and it actually injects the fluid right underneath the skin. That's a very high pressure, 2,500 psi, so when it gets under the skin, it goes very fast, and then it can spread very quickly. In many cases, the farmers will say, oh, it hurts, and it feels, actually like a pinprick. There'll be some burning, but it doesn't look that severe, so they'll just wrap their hands up with a cloth or something to keep going. That can be very dangerous because that fluid can destroy tissue, and eventually what can happen is gangrene can set in. And in many cases, farmers have lost fingers and limbs to the just hydraulic fluid injection. So that's a very small leak. If there's a large leak, then what can happen? Fluid comes out in a massive amount, and it's at this really high temperature and can cause severe burns. Especially if it's in your face, gets in your eyes. It can be very dangerous. Now, when those things happen, if you're out around, away from the equipment, it's dangerous enough, but in some instances, what could happen is the hydraulic hose collapse while you're working underneath the equipment. The hydraulic hose is used in a lot of cases to operate pieces of the equipment that you can't translate that power from the PTO. So farmers like to use the hydraulics, to help look under pieces of their equipment. They raise it with hydraulics and then do maintenance or trying to diagnose problems. And this has happened in the past. While they're underneath the equipment, the hydraulics collapses and basically comes down on top of the person working underneath it. So hydraulics is sort of a hidden danger. It doesn't look that dangerous, but it can be an extremely dangerous piece of the power transmission from the tractor to your implement.